Hello, I'm Dawn Durham, and welcome to PaTTANpod. Students remember our words and our actions. This makes what we say powerful, as our words have the ability to build a student up or break them down. We are so lucky to have Shauna King joining us today on PaTTANpod. Thanks, Shauna, for being here.
Thanks, Dawn, for having me. Excited to be here.
So you are a school culture and climate coach, correct?
Yes, that's right.
So give me a little bit about what really that entails.
So I work with schools K through 12, getting an opportunity to help them with anything from their PBIS initiative to working with teachers and engagement, what we can do to make the entire school a positive place for teaching and learning. So whatever they need under that, whether it's professional development, one-on-one coaching for teachers or things like that, I coach them in those areas.
Wonderful. I love that you're a coach because you're really right alongside with them, ensuring that what we talk about is really implemented and there's a connection between what we do and what we know about the brain. So
absolutely.
Wonderful. We're glad that you're here today to share your knowledge and insight.
Thank you.
So when we think about the language we share with students, what we say, we know that it goes beyond just building relationships. It's really about creating a safe environment for our students, is it not?
It sure is, and it's about that, and it's also more because you want to be able to have a language that when students come in the building, when they come in classrooms, they can feel they know how teachers are talking to them, how their classmates are communicating with them. And I think language is one of those things, as you said, it's so powerful, but we don't always realize how powerful it is. And so being able to have schools and classrooms focus on this free tool, I call it. It's a free tool, it doesn't cost anything. To be able to say, how are we talking to our students? What are those words, those messages that we're using to build a positive culture, but also in speaking to the brain and in teaching. There are certain words that we can use that can make a difference with that. So it's about positive relationships in the culture, but it's still all around the teaching and the learning process.
So when we think about that, creating a positive culture, that's really for all students, but also for all adults as well, for everyone in the environment to feel this sense of safety and sense of their worth matters, and it's significant in that environment.
Absolutely, because words have such an impact, we remember them. Most of us grew up with things like sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Well, that's not true.
That's not true.
It's not true. So sticks and stones may break your bones, but words can bruise forever. And so the words that we use in schools and classrooms, it's not just about the kids. The adults set the tone. And so, when I'm walking by my coworker in the morning, do I say good morning? Do I say it's good to see you today? Do the children see us do those types of things, giving affirmations even to our colleagues, administrators, teachers? So it's not just this is what I want the students to do. It's about how do the adults interact with each other around language.
So that modeling piece I think is crucial. So I'm glad you shared that.
Yes,
wonderful.
Absolutely.
And you kind of led to this when we think about how the adults set the tone. We have different types of language. We have language of engagement and language of equity. Talk to me about what those are. How are they similar? How are they different?
So what I'm finding is when it comes to language, there's two kind of areas. There's when we look at engagement, it's about teaching in the classroom. So whether it's giving clear directions in the classroom, whether I'm asking open-ended questions or closed-ended questions, if I'm building curiosity in my classroom, that's the language that can engage. And even we know from Carol Dweck's work about understanding fixed and growth mindset. What I'm saying in the language I'm communicating can help to make a difference in how engaged that student is. And then when you even think about connecting that to academics and behavior, as I know we've had that conversation about academics and behavior, think about a student who maybe appear off task or something like that. It's one thing to be able to go to that student and say, why are you talking, or why are you on task? It's another thing to go instructional and to keep them engaged and to say, do you have a question about number 3? Where do you think the character is going in this story? And to always keeping them engaged and focused on the instruction through my language. What am I saying at that particular moment is always important. But then you asked about equity. When I think about equity, and we know meeting the students where they are and giving each student what they need, sometimes the language of equity is really about listening to say, what is it that this student needs? So actively listening to say, how might I communicate with you best? And sometimes we don't know the answer to that. Sometimes we need to be able to get some information from the student or even from the parent. I had a teacher ask me about my own 2 children. How can I help support your child best? What do you want me to know about them? And so the language there was the language of building trust, a language of building relationships and being able to say, I want to know who your child is. But then finally on that, the thinking about what they call student-centered language or person-centered language. So I'm not saying the autistic student. I'm saying the student with autism. I'm not saying a Title I student. I'm saying a student who receives Title I services. That language of equity sends a whole message. It's a message of respect, a message of dignity. And so the language of engagement and the language of equity are important.
And that's something, just in those few examples that you shared, that's something that we can really shift quickly without a lot of preparation or thinking through. In our daily interactions with our team members, in our interactions through perhaps like a child study team meeting or a meeting with a parent, and really saying the child with autism, the child who receives Title I services versus the Title I kid.
Exactly.
And I think that it's a low prep but really high outcome.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a crucial piece.
Absolutely. Quick changes that can be made very quickly. And again, no cost, free to do all those things.
Yeah, these free tools are crucial.
Yeah.
And I think that leads me right into this question I want to address with you is, if I'm a teacher, how do I refine my language? But then on the flip side, if I'm an administrator, how do I help my teachers and myself refine my language for my students and their families?
That is such a wonderful question, Dawn, because I think the best way to do this, to refine it, and I have to think of myself when I was a teacher, I needed to refine it basically by listening to myself. It's one thing to say, this is the message I intend to convey. It's another thing to think about how might the receiver hear the message. So a very quick example, let's say as a secondary teacher, and as I was much of my career, if I had a student who came to class late, I might say, excuse me, why are you late? My mind, I'm just asking why you're late. I've stopped my instruction, though, to address across the classroom, why are you late? But think about it. If we were in a staff meeting and the principal, let's say we walked in late, we were doing some things, and we came to the staff meeting late, and the principal halted the staff meeting and across the staff said, excuse me, Miss King, why are you late? Just think about how we would feel at that moment to be called out in front of everybody, almost embarrassed, and as I know, putting our brain almost on alert. And so I think about as a teacher, those are types of things I did. But now I think about it and say, how might the receiver hear that? You've now embarrassed them, those types of things. And I'm not saying we don't address the behavior at a later time or those types of things, but there's so many things that if we take the time to say, let me pause and say, if I were in the listener's shoes and someone said that to me, how might I feel? And so I always focus on the fact that, even if I didn't intend to harm, sometimes we can. And the impact of our words is really more important than the intent of our words. And if I impacted them by harming them, by embarrassing them, that's really not even putting their brain in a good place for learning anyway, because now I'm in a position of alert. What am I going to do? Those types of things, and it does not help.
And you've really deteriorated the trust a little bit.
Absolutely.
Just little by little by little, and you keep doing that. And students walking in, and we've talked about, it's about trust, it's about engagement, it's about instructions, about listening. We've deteriorated a little bit of that each time we do that. And you had said there, think about the message you're conveying, but also how it's going to be received. Because I think those are the two, and you're right, we oftentimes think, what's the message I want to say? But do we stop and think, how will it be received? And putting yourself in that situation.
And I think it's also true to say, this doesn't mean we're bad people.
No.
It doesn't mean we're bad teachers, or even a principal who walks into a classroom and doesn't give any positive feedback. They're just observing. So think about the teacher. Does the teacher then receive, wait a minute, they didn't say anything, can they say something positive? We talk about giving a 4-to-1 ratio for positive to negatives for kids. Do we do that for administrators to teachers? And so just taking the time to be reflective and just saying, even in this area, we can all do better. What are those areas you say, you know what? When it comes to giving affirmations, I do that. But maybe when it comes to listening or the language of equity, I've got some work on that. So we all could definitely do some work in this area.
Absolutely. That's fair. We're always trying to grow. I mean, that's what PaTTAnpod is about, right? We want to inspire those to grow in a professional and educational way. And that leads me, and we ask this of all of our guests, what advice might you offer to those in the field who are listening to this episode saying, this is an area that I could grow in, or in any area, to really inspire them to grow?
I think that's a great question, and I would sum it up this way. I think we can be intentional. I live and I operate under something called BIG, which is called being intentionally great. When it comes to our language, how can we be intentionally great when it comes to those things? And so what that means is I would intentionally say, what are the words that I would love for my students to remember by the end of the year? So if someone had your class, they had Miss Dawn's class, and at the end of the school year, and I met them and I said, say, you were in Miss Dawn's 5th grade class. What are some things she used to always tell you? what are those things that they would say? Because I think those things are important. What are the students hearing those messages beyond finish your work or your homework? What are those big messages? Because words last and they make an impact, and they're going to remember us by those. And so I think if teachers could say and administrators could say, what are those words I want to pass on? So when they see me 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or remember the experience that was here, what are those words, those big messages that they can say, yes, you taught me science, but you also told me to believe in myself. Yes, you taught me math, but you also told me I could do anything I put my mind to. What are those words? And so we can all do that.
Being intentionally great. I love it. And really thinking through when my students leave my classroom in 10 years from now, what will they say that I shared with them?
Yes.
What little nuggets will they take away? What words have I instilled in them? I think that's wonderful advice for all of us. So I thank you so much for that.
Sure.
Thank you, Shauna, for being with us today. You've really helped us kind of frame our thinking and how we use our words to build a student up, and how we need to be cautious not to tear a student or staff members or colleagues down when we don't certainly intend to, but we do need to be reflective in thinking about how those messages are received. So thank you so much for being on PaTTAnpod. Thank you to all of you in the field. You inspire educational growth in your students every day. A special thank you to John Ragsdale for producing this podcast. We'll see you next time on PaTTAnpod.